He thought he had destroyed her. He'd stripped her of the estate, the accounts, and the dignity of a fair settlement. Standing on the wet pavement, he waited for the tears for the moment Sharon would realize she was nothing without him. But Sharon didn't cry. She didn't even look back. She walked to the curb as a sleek, black luxury limo pulled up, a car that signaled power, not just wealth. As the door opened and a hand reached out to welcome her, his smirk vanished. He hadn't discarded a broken woman. He had unleashed a hidden force. And the man waiting for her inside was about to turn his empire into a graveyard. Minutes earlier, the courthouse lights had hummed with a sterile buzz. "Sign here," the lawyer said, sliding a gold pen across the desk. To her ex-husband, Sharon looked defeated in her modest trench coat and silent stare. "You understand the terms?" he sneered. "No alimony. No property. You leave with nothing but the clothes on your back." Sharon signed without a word. She knew what he didn't. She wasn't leaving with nothing. She was leaving with the secrets that kept him alive. Before we dive into the story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And if this story pulls you in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, because I have another beautiful story coming tomorrow, and you definitely don't want to miss it. Now, let's get into the story. The hum of the city faded as Sharon stepped into the plush confines of the limousine, the door closing with a soft thud that seemed to signal the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The air inside was thick with a mix of leather and something more potent, an unspoken power that made her skin prickle. She settled into the seat, the coolness of the leather contrasting sharply with the warmth of her anxiety. As the vehicle pulled away from the courthouse, the silence inside felt heavy, almost oppressive. Then, like a whisper cutting through the tension, Eric Jackson's voice broke the stillness. "You did well today, Sharon." His tone was calm, controlled, imbued with a subtle authority that made her pulse quicken. She turned to face him, her eyes locking onto his. Eric Jackson was a man who commanded attention without raising his voice, a dangerous man who didn't need to threaten. His presence filled the space around him, an unyielding force that both intimidated and reassured. Sharon finally exhaled, a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He was known only in whispers, a name that circulated through the shadows of the city, feared in the financial districts where fortunes were made and lost, respected in criminal networks where loyalty was bought and sold, and acknowledged in political circles where power was the only currency that mattered. Eric didn't flirt with danger, he embraced it. As she studied him, memories surged to the forefront of her mind years ago, when she had helped him quietly solve a problem that had threatened to unravel an empire. No names had been exchanged, no contracts signed. Just a mutual respect established in the darkness, where both of them had learned the value of discretion. It was a time when trust was a currency that could easily be spent and lost, and they had navigated those treacherous waters together. "Are we really doing this?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Eric turned slightly, his gaze piercing through the dim light of the limousine. "You've crossed an invisible line, Sharon. You're under my protection now." Those words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. The protection clause he'd spoken of was more than mere legal jargon. It was a lifeline thrown into a turbulent sea. She could feel the weight of his assurance, a shield of sorts, wrapping around her in a way that felt both comforting and constricting. "Legal shields are already in motion," he continued, his voice low and even. "Surveillance has been lifted, and your accounts are secured." Sharon felt a rush of relief at his reassurances, yet a twinge of unease flickered beneath the surface. With every layer of protection he offered, she felt the weight of her choices pressing down on her. It wasn't just about her anymore, it was about the alliances she had forged in the dark, and the truths that now bound her to Eric Jackson. "Why now?" she questioned, her brow furrowing. "Why offer this protection after all these years?" He met her gaze, unflinching. "Because you've proven yourself to be more than just a problem solver. You understand the stakes, and you're not afraid to play the game." Sharon swallowed hard. She had always been aware of the risks, the delicate balance between power and vulnerability. But now, standing at the precipice of this new alliance, she felt an exhilarating rush of empowerment. Eric Jackson was a force of nature, and by his side, she was no longer just a pawn in someone else's game. She was a player. The city outside blurred as they drove past towering skyscrapers and flashing lights, the world moving at a dizzying pace that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. She turned her gaze to the window, watching as the courthouse faded into the distance. The weight of her previous life began to lift, replaced by a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. As the limousine glided through the streets, Sharon realized that there was no going back. The life she had known, the fears that had once consumed her, were slipping away like shadows in the light. In this new reality, she was no longer just Sharon. She was part of something larger, something that held the promise of power and influence. With Eric Jackson at her side, she felt a shift within herself, a transformation that was both thrilling and daunting. Relief washed over her, mingling with a fierce determination. She was ready to embrace this new chapter, to step into the light with a renewed sense of purpose. But as the city continued to pulse around her, she couldn't shake the feeling that with every choice came a price. And in a world ruled by shadows, the cost of power was often steep. Sharon had never been the wife who waited at home with dinner warming. She had been the one reading term sheets at 3 a.m. while her husband slept soundly beside her, convinced his instincts alone had carried him this far. In the early days of their marriage, back when the company was still called something small and forgettable, she sat across from him at their chipped Formica kitchen table, red pen in hand. He would hand her thick stacks of contracts, the kind printed on legal paper that smelled faintly of toner and ambition. "Just glance," he'd say, already half-turned toward the television. She never just glanced. She flagged the clauses that could bleed them dry, non-compete language too loose, indemnity provisions that shifted every risk onto them, earnouts structured to invite litigation. When a distributor tried to slip in a hidden escalation clause tied to commodity prices, she caught it. When a venture partner quietly inserted a drag-along right that could force a sale at a fire sale valuation, she circled it twice. Most nights she rewrote entire sections in the margins, then typed clean versions before dawn. He signed. The deals closed. The revenue climbed. He told dinner guests the story of his gut feel that had won the day. She never corrected him. Sharon became the silent filter. Crisis manager when vendors threatened to walk. Negotiator when regulators circled too close. Information gatekeeper who decided what reached his desk and what disappeared into the shredder. She maintained the off-book ledger, not in any literal book, but in her head, the favors owed, the favors collected, the quiet transfers to accounts no one else knew existed. She handled the dangerous partnerships, the ones that smelled of easy money and carried the faint metallic tang of trouble. She arranged the silent payoffs when someone needed to forget what they had seen. Each transaction was clean, deniable, and documented only in her private cipher. She stayed silent because survival demanded it. In their world, visibility was vulnerability. A woman who claimed credit risked being labeled difficult, ambitious in the wrong way, or worse, untrustworthy. So she chose strategy instead. She built buffers around him, layers of plausible deniability, loyal intermediaries, contingency accounts he never asked about. She timed every move. She waited. The decision to leave came not in a single dramatic moment, but in a quiet recalibration. By then the empire had grown teeth, sharp enough to bite its maker. She had watched him surround himself with people who fed his ego and ignored the cracks. She had seen the buffers thin. One evening, after another late-night call where he barked orders at someone who deserved better, she sat alone in the study and made the list. What she would keep mattered more than what she would lose. The divorce was surgical. She had already moved assets into trusts years earlier, nothing flashy, nothing that would trigger alarms. She took no alimony, no headline-making settlement. She took control of the pieces that mattered, the offshore structures she had designed, the quiet equity positions, the network of contacts who owed her, not him. When the papers were signed, he believed he had won. She let him. Years later, the call came on a Thursday evening. Eric's voice was low, almost amused. "They're circling," he said without preamble. "The buffers are gone, Sharon. Every single one." She stood at the window of her apartment, city lights glittering below like scattered coins. She felt no surprise, only the calm that follows long preparation. Her ex-husband had always imagined the empire was his alone. Now the scaffolding she had quietly erected, every discreet fix, every neutralized threat, every hidden valve, was stripped away. The off-book connections were surfacing. The dangerous partnerships were unraveling. The silent payoffs were no longer silent. She turned from the window, a small, private smile touching her lips. "He's exposed," she said softly. Eric waited on the line, patient. Sharon exhaled, feeling the old weight lift. For the first time in decades, she was no longer protecting anyone but herself. And she was very, very good at it. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday morning, disguised as routine. A mid-tier supplier in Rotterdam emailed to say the next shipment was indefinitely delayed pending clarification of certain compliance matters. No explanation followed. When the CEO's assistant called to press, the line went dead. By noon, 3 more counterparties had sent near-identical messages, polite, vague, final. The boardroom smelled of burnt coffee and sudden silence. He stormed through the glass corridors barking orders no one dared contradict anymore. "Get me the contracts," he snapped at the paralegal who had replaced Sharon years earlier. The young man returned with a stack that felt thinner than it should. Half the side letters, the quiet ones that had always smoothed the edges, were missing from the files. Someone had redacted them long ago. Someone who knew exactly which pages mattered. Partners began to ghost. The private equity group that had promised bridge financing sent a single-line email. "Regrettably, internal review has identified unacceptable risk exposure." No meeting, no negotiation. The line went cold. The man who once bragged he could charm a snake now found himself dialing numbers that rang straight to voicemail. Even the criminal contacts, the ones who never used their real names, had vanished from the encrypted apps. No reply. No explanation. Just absence. He told himself it was temporary. Market jitters. Bad timing. He poured another scotch and rehearsed the speech he would give Sharon when she inevitably crawled back. She was bluffing. She had to be. Without him she was nothing, a shadow who had lived off his spotlight. He texted her once, short and sharp. "You think you can scare me? Call off your dogs." No answer. He sent another, angrier. Still nothing. The silence felt like a slap. He tried intimidation next. A late-night call to her new apartment building security desk, dropping his name like a battering ram. The guard was polite but firm. "Ms. Reynolds has instructed us not to accept messages from you." He hung up, knuckles white. He instructed his fixer to remind her who she's dealing with. The fixer called back an hour later, voice low. "She's not there anymore. Moved last month. No forwarding address. And the doorman says she left instructions. Anyone asking for her gets logged and reported." He laughed it off in front of the remaining staff. "She's playing games. Let her. She'll fold." But the laugh sounded thinner each time he repeated it. Meanwhile, truths began to surface without fanfare. A whistleblower post appeared on an industry forum, anonymous, precise, laced with dates and deal codes only insiders would recognize. It named no one directly, yet every sentence pointed at the same man. Within hours, screen grabs circulated on private Slack channels. Then came the first regulatory letter, a polite request for documents related to transactions dating back 7 years. The kind of letter that arrives only after someone has already spoken to the authorities off record. Eric's network moved with the patience of professionals who bill by the hour. Quiet subpoenas landed on peripheral accounts. A forensic accountant, hired through cutouts, started tracing wires that had once been invisible. Reputation leaks followed, small items in trade publications, then bigger ones in financial blogs. Questions surround former industry titans' offshore structures. No accusations, just questions. Enough to make counterparties nervous. He sat alone in the corner office that used to feel like a throne room. The skyline beyond the windows looked smaller tonight. He opened the drawer where he kept the emergency cash, 2 banded stacks that had always been there for emergencies. The drawer was empty. Not raided. Simply gone. Someone had known the combination years ago and never touched it until now. He called the one number he still trusted. It rang 6 times before a recorded voice informed him the line was no longer in service. That was when the realization landed, heavy and final. She had been the firewall. Not the pretty assistant, not the loyal COO, not the expensive lawyers. Her. The woman who read every line, rewrote the dangerous clauses, paid the right people to forget, built the hidden valves that let pressure escape before it could explode. She had stood between him and consequences for 2 decades. He had mistaken her silence for weakness, her invisibility for irrelevance. Without her, there was nothing left to absorb the blow. He stared at the darkened screen of his phone. No new messages. No missed calls. Just his own reflection, older than he remembered, eyes wide with something he had not felt since childhood. Fear. The empire he had believed was built on his nerve and vision was burning now, and the only person who knew how to put out the fire had walked away and locked the door behind her. He understood, too late, that collapse does not arrive with trumpets. It arrives in the quiet click of doors closing, numbers disconnecting, and the slow, inevitable surfacing of every truth she had once buried for him. 3 weeks after the first headlines turned vicious, the ballroom at the International Commerce Summit in Dubai glittered under 1,000 pinpoint lights. The room was packed with the same people who had once toasted her ex-husband's keynote speeches and now whispered about his disappearing liquidity. They had expected him to appear tonight. Rumor said he was desperate for one last visible win. Instead, the stage lights caught someone else entirely. Sharon stepped forward in a single-breasted black suit cut sharp enough to draw breath. No jewelry except the thin platinum band she had worn since the day she walked out of the marriage. No flourish. Just presence. The moderator introduced her simply, Sharon Reynolds, founder and principal of Reynolds Strategic Partners. No mention of the ex. No, former wife of. The omission felt deliberate, surgical. She took the podium without notes. The room hushed faster than it ever had for him. She spoke for 17 minutes. Not about revenge. Not about betrayal. She spoke about structures, how fragile they become when built on ego instead of architecture. She described risk not as something to be muscled through, but as mathematics, probability multiplied by consequence. She named no names. She didn't have to. Every sentence landed like a quiet recalibration of the entire industry's memory. Cameras caught the shift in faces. Board chairs who had once dismissed her as arm candy now leaned forward. Journalists who had written puff pieces about his visionary leadership tapped furiously on tablets, rewriting leads in real time. Afterward, she did not disappear into the green room. She moved through the crowd the way water moves through stone, smooth, inevitable. Eric was at her side, not possessive, not protective. Simply there. When photographers approached, neither of them stepped away. The photos would run the next morning with captions that no longer included the word X. They read, Sharon Reynolds and Eric Lang at the Dubai Summit. Present tense. Equal billing. The internet did what the internet does best. It caught fire. Tabloids that had spent months painting her as the discarded wife now raced to reframe. The quiet power behind the throne finally speaks. Divorce wasn't the end, it was the beginning. Anonymous industry accounts posted threads dissecting old deals, suddenly noticing the same hand in the margins of every major contract her ex had ever celebrated. The narrative flipped so fast it left skid marks. She had not leaked anything. She hadn't needed to. Once the firewall vanished, the truth had its own momentum. A cable news anchor caught her briefly in the corridor. Microphone thrust forward. Ms. Reynolds, people are saying you orchestrated your ex-husband's downfall. Any comment? Sharon paused, considered the lens the way she used to consider fine print. I spent 20 years making sure consequences never arrived, she said. I stopped doing that job 3 years ago. What happens next isn't orchestration. It's physics. No bitterness in her voice. No satisfaction either. Just clarity, the same tone she had used when she once explained to him why a particular indemnity clause would cost them everything if it ever triggered. The anchor blinked, unsure what to do with an answer that refused drama. She gave one more interview that night, print only. When the reporter asked why she had stayed silent so long, she answered without hesitation, silence isn't absence. It's a choice. I chose when to speak. Back in the city that had once belonged to him, her ex-husband sat alone in what remained of the corner office. The screensaver had timed out. The only light came from the muted television on the far wall. A financial channel was replaying the summit clip in a loop. There she was, calm, elevated, untouchable, speaking words that rewrote every story he had ever told about himself. He watched her walk off stage beside Eric. Watched the way the crowd parted for her now, not out of courtesy, but recognition. He had spent decades convinced the empire was his singular creation. Tonight the broadcast made it plain. The empire had been a collaboration he had never acknowledged. And when the silent partner withdrew her protection, the structure folded exactly as she had always known it would. He reached for the remote to turn the television off. His hand stopped halfway. He could not look away. She had not attacked him. She had simply stopped defending him. And in that single act of withdrawal, she had rewritten the entire narrative. No longer the discarded wife. No longer the invisible support. She was the principal now, the one who understood the architecture better than anyone still standing. The screen flickered to a new headline crawler. Reynolds Strategic Partners announces advisory mandate for 3 major funds. He stared at the words until they blurred. She had not come back for revenge. She had come back to claim what had always been hers. The reckoning arrived on a gray October morning in a glass-walled hearing room on the 38th floor of a regulatory building that overlooked the river. Not a courtroom, nothing so theatrical, but a closed-session financial inquiry convened by an international task force. The agenda was dry: review of cross-border transaction compliance, 2015 to 2024. The guest list was not. Every major fund manager, compliance officer, and journalist with the right clearance had requested a seat behind the observation glass. Word had spread quietly. Today the mask would slip. He arrived first, flanked by 2 lawyers in charcoal suits and the pinched expression of a man who still believed he could talk his way out. He wore the same navy pinstripe that had once signaled unassailable confidence. Now it hung slightly loose at the shoulders. He took the witness chair without looking at the observation window. He did not expect her to be there. Sharon entered last. She walked in beside Eric, stride matched, no deference in her posture. She wore charcoal wool, single-breasted, the same cut she had chosen for Dubai, but tailored sharper. No statement necklace, no power heels, just the quiet authority of someone who no longer needed to announce herself. Heads turned. Not in surprise anymore. In recognition. The panel chair, a silver-haired woman with the patience of granite, opened the session by reading a single prepared statement. New documentary material has been submitted to the inquiry. The submitter has requested anonymity, but has authorized full disclosure of contents relevant to the matters under review. A screen behind the panel lit up. The first document was a side letter dated 2017 and signed on its face, yet unmistakably hers in the margin notes. Precise red ink circled a liability shifting clause that had allowed a high-risk joint venture to proceed without triggering disclosure requirements. Beside it, in her neat hand, unacceptable exposure. Rewrite or walk. The rewritten version followed, the dangerous language excised. Then came the payment records. Transfers to numbered accounts in jurisdictions no one had previously connected. Each wire bore reference lines only she would have chosen, coded dates, deal identifiers, quiet signals that tied the money to specific threats neutralized. Page after page. Contract after contract. Every time he had celebrated a genius close, the Real work appeared now in black and white. Her revisions, her warnings, her off-book arrangements that had kept regulators at bay, kept criminal partners placated, kept the empire breathing. The room stayed silent except for the soft click of shutters from the observation gallery. He stared at the screen. At first, he tried to lean forward, as though proximity could alter what was already projected. Then he sat back. The color left his face in slow stages. The panel moved to questions. They were polite, procedural, devastating. Mr. Reynolds, can you explain the purpose of the $2.8 million transfer to Cayman Entity 47 Alpha on March 12, 2019? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out for 3 full seconds. I relied on advisors, he managed. Which advisors? He named the firm that had replaced her. The lead counsel in the room shifted uncomfortably. The chair turned her gaze toward the side door. Ms. Reynolds, you have been granted limited participatory status. Do you wish to make a statement? Sharon stood. No notes. No tremor. I spent 2 decades ensuring that consequences arrived late, if at all, she said. I chose the timing of their arrival. I chose which ones never arrived. Today I chose differently. She did not look at him. She did not need to. The questions continued, but the atmosphere had inverted. When he answered, voices were clipped, skeptical. When Sharon clarified a technical point calmly, factually, the panel nodded, took notes, asked follow-ups with deference. Silence, once her weapon of protection, had changed sides. Now it pressed against him. Every pause in his responses felt like an accusation. He tried one last deflection. This is character assassination dressed as compliance. The chair raised an eyebrow. The documents speak for themselves, Mr. Reynolds. Ms. Reynolds has not accused anyone. She has simply stopped concealing. He looked up then, really looked, and found her eyes for the first time in years. She met his gaze without anger, without triumph. Only clarity. The same clarity she had once offered when she told him a deal was too dangerous to touch. He had ignored her then. He could not ignore her now. In that moment the truth settled into his bones. She had never been the shadow. She had been the structure. And when she withdrew, the entire edifice, his edifice, had no choice but to collapse exactly as designed. The session adjourned at 2:47 p.m. He remained seated while others filed out. When the room was nearly empty, he finally stood. His lawyers murmured something about next steps. He did not appear to hear them. Sharon paused at the door beside Eric. She glanced back once, not in pity, not in victory. Simply acknowledgement. Then she walked out into the corridor where cameras waited, where the new narrative was already being written in real time. He stayed behind, alone with the afterimage of documents that bore her handwriting and the sudden, suffocating weight of total reversal. She had chosen when to speak. She had chosen what to destroy. And she had chosen to let him watch it burn. Winter settled over the city like a verdict already delivered. The last of his companies filed for protection the week before Christmas. The announcement came buried in a 3-line regulatory filing, no press release, no defiant statement, just numbers that told the story plainly, assets liquidated at fractions of book value, creditors circling the carcass, board members who had once saluted him now listed as resigned. The man who had once filled arenas with talk of empire was reduced to a name in fine print. Allies evaporated faster than the cash. The fixer who had answered every midnight call now claimed he never knew the number. The loyal COO who had taken Sharon's place issued a carefully worded LinkedIn post about new opportunities before the ink dried on the bankruptcy notice. Even the criminal contacts, the ones who had once sent polite threats wrapped in courtesy, sent nothing at all. Silence was their final invoice. He lost more than money. He lost the story he had told himself for decades, the self-made visionary, the man whose gut had never failed. Without the scaffolding she had built, the myth collapsed under its own weight. Photographs of him now showed a stranger, shoulders rounded, eyes hollow, the expensive suit hanging like borrowed clothes. Identity, it turned out, had been the most expensive asset of all. Sharon watched none of it. She did not need updates. The architecture she had designed years earlier still functioned perfectly, every valve closed exactly when it should, every hidden ledger balanced to zero. She had not engineered his ruin out of spite. She had simply stopped preventing it. There was no vengeance high to chase, no rage to burn clean. Only control, cool, complete, and final. On a clear January evening, she sat in the back of the same black limo that had carried her away 3 years earlier. The city lights moved past the tinted windows in slow, liquid streaks. Eric sat beside her this time, not across from her. No partition between them. No urgent whispers into a phone. Just quiet. She wore the same charcoal coat she had chosen for the inquiry, the same platinum band on her finger. The difference was in her posture, no longer braced for escape, no longer calculating exits. She leaned back against the leather, one hand resting lightly on the armrest, the other loose in her lap. The woman who had once read every contract in the dark now looked out at a skyline she no longer needed to conquer. Eric watched her profile for a long moment. "You could have ended him faster," he said quietly. Not an accusation. An observation. "I could have," she answered. "But endings that fast leave questions. I wanted certainty." He nodded once. The car turned onto the river road, lights reflecting off black water like scattered diamonds. She thought of the chipped Formica table where it had all begun, her red pen moving across pages while he slept. She thought of the nights she had rewritten clauses that would have destroyed them both, of the payoffs arranged in code, of the buffers she had layered so carefully he never felt their weight. She had not stayed silent out of fear or love. She had stayed silent because timing was everything. She had walked away without a word not because she was weak. She had walked away because the next chapter belonged to her. The limo slowed at a light. She turned her head slightly toward Eric. "What happens now?" He smiled, small and private. "Whatever you decide." Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm, taxis weaving, pedestrians hurrying, towers burning against the night. None of it required her protection anymore. None of it required her at all. She exhaled, a breath she had been holding for years. The light changed. The car moved forward. Sharon Reynolds looked straight ahead, city lights sliding across her face in soft gold. No anger left. No bitterness. Only the calm that follows perfect execution. She had not come back to destroy. She had come back to ascend. And now, finally, she was free. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you loved this one, I have more videos just like it waiting for you on my channel. Click the video on your screen now and keep the story going. Enjoy!